And if this is your first time giving your mind a little love, I have a few goodies for you. First, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And second, sign up for the Morning Mind Love. Think of it like a weekday oracle from your highest self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, you'll get 2 gifts absolutely free: a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up. Welcome to Mind Love, episode 311. Today's episode is all about how gut inflammation caused by stress, shame, and trauma affects your mood and your immune system.
You don't have to necessarily know, is this my trauma or is this some ancestral thing? The point is, what do we have to do today to start to heal from this? And I would say too, if anything, I think shifting your perspective and paradigm to, wow, a little bit more self-compassion and say, well, what I'm going through today isn't just me, and I'm not just broken. I can heal from these things. And as trauma can be inherited, so can healing. And I see people break the cycles of dysfunction, disease, and disorder and dysregulation all the time and heal themselves, but also heal their families, heal their friend circles, and are actually planting a seed for a new generation. Like if they choose to have kids, like they're healing their kids and their children's children and generations they'll never get to meet because of what they did in this life. What power is that we wield?
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom, so don't forget to subscribe. When was the last time you really listened to your gut? And not just the rumbles of hunger, but the deeper messages that your body sends you. Can you recall a time when you ignored a gut feeling only to regret it later? We've all been there, and I am no exception. For most of my life, my relationship with my body was one of conflict and misunderstanding. Even as a child, I remember sneaking an 3 extra cookies into my pocket when my mom's friend limited us to 2. It was like this little act of rebellion, but it spoke to a deeper disconnect. During my teenage years, that disconnect grew. I'd find myself standing before the mirror, sucking in my stomach and scrutinizing every inch. I felt trapped in a body that I didn't love, almost waging a war against myself. And that war escalated in my 20s. Starving my body became a regular practice, and purging food turned into a way to exert some sort of control. Then on top of all that, the allure of toxic productivity and the constant hustle made burnout some sort of badge of honor for me. I was addicted to that dopamine rush from social media, eating without thinking, shopping for things I didn't need. My body and all of its functions was no longer really a part of me. It was more of an adversary, something to be tamed and dominated. And it all seemed like necessities for success. But at what cost? I was disconnected from my body, engaging in mindless consumption, and not just with food, but also with technology and relationships. My gut was crying out, and I ignored it. The disconnection led to digestive issues, stress, and a feeling that something just wasn't quite right. I was kind of like a car driving with the warning lights on, ignoring all of the signs. But what I failed to recognize was that my body wasn't a servant needing to submit and obey. It was my partner on this incredible journey called life. It was a relationship waiting to be healed, a connection waiting to be rediscovered. It's a story that's both painful and enlightening, a journey that led me to a profound understanding of the mind-body connection. And it's not just my story, though. It's our story, isn't it? We're caught up in a world that constantly demands more from us. Between the convenience of processed foods, the relentless demands of our daily routines, the stress levels that skyrocket through work and personal commitments, an addiction to technology that keeps us constantly connected, and then there's the environmental factors like pollution and chemicals in our everyday products. We are extremely hard on our gut. It's just unhealthy, and it affects our well-being at the very core. But what if I told you that healing your relationship with your gut could transform your life? That understanding the trillions of bacteria influencing your mood, immunity, and inflammation levels could unlock new levels of health and happiness. Your gut is not just about digestion. It's your second brain. It's a silent guide that affects every aspect of your life. By neglecting it, we're ignoring a vital part of ourselves, a part that's yearning for attention and balance and care. So today we're discovering the beautiful connection between what we eat, how we feel, and the legacy we leave behind. Our guest is Dr. Will Cole. He's a leading functional medicine expert who specializes in clinically investigating underlying factors of chronic disease and customizing a functional medicine approach for thyroid issues, autoimmune conditions, hormonal imbalances, digestive disorders, and more. He's the host of the Art of Being Well podcast and author of Gut Feelings, Ketotarian, The Inflammation Spectrum, and the New York Times bestseller Intuitive Fasting. 3 key things we will learn are a checklist to help identify poor vagal tone, how to identify hormonal imbalances that require customized care, and breathwork and somatic practices to help regulate your nervous system. And now let's welcome Dr. Will Cole to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what inspired your interest in the gut-brain connection?
Well, my day job really, you have to be inspired by it, right? To do what I do. So I started one of the first functional medicine telehealth centers 13 plus years ago. So my main focus is looking at labs and getting to the root cause and looking at the variables from a diagnostic side of things on a lot of different gut-brain axis issues, which is the connection between the gut and the brain. And for people that are unaware of that, the gut and brain are formed from the same fetal tissue. So when babies were growing in their mother's womb, the gut and brain are formed from that same tissue, and they are inextricably linked for the rest of our life through what's known in the scientific literature as the gut-brain axis, or the connection between the gut and the brain. And beyond that, a lot of my work is really stemmed around and centered around the neuroimmunoendocrine axis, or the intersection between the nervous system, the immune system, i.e. chronic inflammation, and the endocrine system, or the hormone system. So that's really where the topic of this bidirectional relationship between mental health and physical health, and the fact that mental health is physical health, and really educating people about that in book form, are really it's born out of conversations that we have with telehealth patients every day.
So tell us a little bit about the emotional influence on our physical health.
So on that bidirectional relationship, and that's one of the reasons why I called the book Gut Feelings, both gut and feelings, and thinking about that, okay, even from a human lexicon cliche standpoint of gut feelings and gut instincts, and I just feel it in my gut, or butterflies in my stomach, and that's the gut-brain axis in common words, common nomenclature, but just understanding that somehow the gut played a role into our emotions and our mood. And somehow our ancestors knew that the gut was the seat of the soul, but they didn't have randomized controlled trials. And now science is really catching up with antiquity, that we see all this exciting science looking at how the gut and physiological things beyond the gut, right? Just physiological things impacting mental health. And in many ways, we have a long way to catch up to, is relegating mental health as sort of this abstract, quote unquote, chemical imbalance, or there's something separate than physical health. But our brain is so much, it's influenced by the same pathways as any other system of the body. The old thought was that the brain was immune privileged, is how researchers would say it, because of the blood-brain barrier. There was no such thing as the brain's immune system, or inflammation did not impact, or other aspects of the immune system did not impact the brain. But now we know the brain has its own set of aspect of the immune system. The microglial cells impact neuroinflammation, which is a whole field of research called this. It's called the cytokine model of cognitive function. Cytokines are pro-inflammatory cells. So these are things that we can quantify in labs for patients, is looking at how does inflammation and things that cause inflammation, ultimately, how do these things impact mental health and our mood? And we have what's called the gut-brain axis that I mentioned, or the microbiome mood axis, so the trillions of bacteria in our gut. But inflammation is the commonality between things like anxiety and depression and brain fog and fatigue and different autoimmune problems. But ultimately, what caused the inflammation? Because inflammation is not inherently bad. Inflammation is a product of the immune system. It's meant to fight off viruses and kill off bacteria and heal wounds. It's a normal part. We would be goners without healthy, measured inflammatory responses in the body. But to answer your question, how do emotions impact our physical health? We have to look at both physiological and psychological drivers of inflammation. Whether you're talking about neuroinflammation, i.e. the nervous system inflammation, or just systemic inflammation, which is implicated to just about every health problem under the sun when you're looking at autoimmune problems or metabolic issues or cancers or heart diseases or like joint pain and digestive problems. So the psychological side of that is really important. And researchers are just scratching the surface of how the feelings side of gut feelings impacts our physical health. So one of the ways we quantify this, as far as data is concerned, is something called an ACE score. We have every telehealth patient fill it out. It's not just within functional medicine, it's within larger healthcare as well. It's the Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire. We're looking at things like sexual trauma growing up, physical abuse growing up, neglect growing up. Was there substance abuse in the home growing up? Cumulatively, the higher the ACE score, it's associated with increased rates of autoimmune problems, metabolic issues, mental health issues, of course, later on in life. So that's just childhood, let alone beyond childhood, looking at stress and unresolved trauma and something that I call in the book shame inflammation. How does something like shame on a daily basis impact our health? And it's typically a confluence of both physiological and psychological factors, or both the gut and the feelings side, this bidirectional crosstalk between the two of how these things are literally stored in our body, because our body is a cellular library, and our thoughts, our words, our emotions, our experiences, and things like food and nutrients, right, make up the books that fill up that cellular library. So that's really what we have to look. The term that I call about it, I talk about it in the book in this terms. I call them metaphysical meals. Like the foods we eat impact our cellular function, our microbiome health, and inflammation levels. We know that, right? But what we're feeding our head and our heart impacts our biochemistry just as much as the next meal or a supplement or something we're feeding ourselves.
So it sounds like it's kind of a vicious cycle, whereas originally the feelings that we feel, the shame that we experience, the trauma we experience impacts our gut health. And then with poor gut health, that seems to feed back into our minds an increase of anxiety and depression.
Yeah, it is. And that's why a both and approach is the needle mover. It is, and not that you have to have it all figured out. And that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying being consistent with a both and approach and keeping that in your mind. And that's why people oftentimes get stuck when they have an either or approach and they say, well, it's just that or just that. It's multifaceted. And even within those umbrellas of physiological and psychological, or the gut and the feelings, there's a lot of variables to consider there. But the great news is that the body's amazingly resilient and also amazingly interconnected. So you don't necessarily have to have it all figured out to start getting your head above that proverbial water, which then will increase your bandwidth and resilience. You'll want to keep doing the things that love you back. So hopefully that makes sense, is that in a way you really can just start leaning into these micro habits that enable your body to give your body the nourishment or time or space to regulate itself. And that's why I adapted the protocol in the book from protocols we have for telehealth patients. And every day there's a gut tool and a feelings tool where you're dealing with both sides of that coin to nourish that. But then some people, I just take my author hat off for a second and just clinically, Some people, therein is just one of those where it's like the psychological side of things, like my past childhood trauma, my unresolved trauma is just too much for me to handle right now. I can't even go there, or they don't even know they need to go there. But the physiological stuff, they can wrap their minds around. I can focus on nourishing my gut. And I talk about like something like a GAPS protocol in the book, where it stands for gut and psychology syndrome, or gut and physiology syndrome. These are things that we implement into patient protocols to nourish that gut brain axis using foods. So for them, like, okay, I can focus on soups and stews. I can start diminishing the foods that don't love me back in my life and nourish my body with things that ground me and regulate me and support that gut brain axis. Okay, that's great. Let's start there. And then when you get your head above that water, you'll have the resilience. And I see this all the time with patients. They'll be like, okay, that thing you mentioned months ago, I'm ready to cross that bridge now because it's less overwhelming and it's the time is right. And for some people, the food or the physiological stuff, the nutrition stuff is very overwhelming for them. So for them, like the breath work or the EMDR or the somatic practice is a lot more, they're ready to cross that bridge. So you have to meet a person where they're at, or for the person that's listening to this, meet yourself where you're at. And doing something is better than doing nothing at all. And sometimes people can get this overwhelm, this shameflation about good things about their health that is counterproductive. So lean in, meet your body where it's at. And this paralysis of analysis is a saboteur. Like, what's that cliche of like something about being the enemy of the good? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Where it's like, you don't have perfection is the enemy of good, maybe is what it is. Whatever. The point being is you don't have to be perfect. And I think giving yourself grace and lightness, meeting your body where it's at is good enough. And actually, it's the best place to start, because stressing about healthy things isn't good for your health.
Yeah, I can find myself in that because I'm very aware of all of the toxins in the environment and organic and the water and the air and everything. And I'm like, okay, take a deep breath, because my beliefs are also going to influence everything. And if I'm constantly telling myself the food is poisoned, my body's going to react that way. And so I've kind of changed my perspective of going back to mindful eating that helped me overcome an eating disorder in the past, and just like blessing my food in a way, and just like really imagining it nourishing my body in all of the ways. And it just changes my experience with it a little bit, even emotionally. So I can only imagine what it's doing on the other end, the ways that I can't see.
Oh yeah. I mean, the space in which you eat the meal is an ingredient to the outcome of that meal. I see that all the time, that in theory, if you're looking at labs and data and having a lot of clinical experience like we do, and we know, okay, look, on paper, this food protocol looks like it's going to be very appropriate to getting that person really healthy. But they're stressing around the food. There's a lot of obsession. There's a lot of inner resistance around the whole process. It's going to be a complete saboteur to what we're trying to do. So we can implement mindful eating practices, which we would do, and really shifting their paradigm, empowering them, and showing them a new way to see it. And sometimes, a lot of times that does work, but sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes even with all the mindfulness approach, it's like this is a source of stress for them. So sometimes we have to be pragmatists. Oftentimes we have to be pragmatists. And that's sort of the science and art of wellness. And the art part of it is plan B sometimes is plan A, or plan B is the source of joy and sustainable and realistic for their schedule. So that's kind of the nuance and context around, I think, these topics, is that you have to meet yourself where you're at on every level.
In your book, you say that chronic stress is actually the ultimate junk food for the body. And it got me thinking, because oftentimes we're eating junk food and it's sort of an addiction. Do we get addicted to our own stress in that same way as well?
I think so. Yeah. In our culture, and we wouldn't see it like that per se. Maybe some of us would, the real freaks out there would, but but most people wouldn't realize it. But it's our hustle culture, right? It's the burnout is seen as a badge of honor. it is so ingrained into many of us to varying degrees, but the constant go, the constant numbing and distraction with social media and food and buying things and being busy really does become addictive, because there's levels amongst all those examples that I mentioned of dopamine, like cheap dopamine hits that keeps us coming back for more. And this is advertising. We're advertised many different ways to numb and distract and get that cheap dopamine rush. That is addictive. It is addicting. And based on our own bio-individuality, some people are addicted to it more than others, but really, it would be difficult today to find someone unscathed from this epidemic of toxic productivity or busyness, hustle culture. That it's a balancing act. People need to be successful or provide for their families, and we have amazing blessings and privileges within our culture. All of that stuff is good. I'm not saying we should go back to the Stone Age and all be off the grid Amish people, and not that they work hard too, but you know what I mean, like just forego modernity. We can have a both and approach even with this, and not be extreme toxic tribalism when it comes to these topics. I think we can live a modern life, but what are healthy boundaries with ourselves ultimately? Because the relationship we have with ourselves in these topics and the foods or the things that we consume, whether it's technology or whatever, that plays a role. So stress is typically disguised in very alluring ways where we don't even see it as stress, but it's a source of background anxiety, or this constant stimulation, if you will, of that sympathetic fight or flight stressed state. And most of us, and I talk about this at length in the book, have poor vagal tone. They have a weak vagus nerve, which is the largest cranial nerve in the body that's responsible for our resting, digesting state. And most of us, born out of our nervous system dysregulation, do a lot of things that perpetuate that dysregulation.
I'm glad you brought up the vagus nerve, because I'm curious, how can we test the health of the vagus nerve? How do we know if ours is weak or strong?
Well, I think questionnaires, checklists can be a good way to do that. As of this point, there's no readily available like vagus nerve conduction test or vagus nerve test. I'm sure at some point there will be ways to measure it. But the most common, I would say, is checking in with your body and seeing how you feel. And then I would say this, labs that we do measure can look tangentially at the things that are associated with poor vagal tone. So I'll explain that in a second. But starting subjectively, if you look at things like, do I have anxiety? Do I have depression? That is very much linked to, you're almost certain to have some sort of vagal nerve tone issue, some poor vagal tone, at least a component to why you feel the way that you do. It's part of that neuroimmunoendocrine axis that I mentioned. It's the neuro part of the neuroimmunoendocrine axis. So that's it's a major connector to the gut-brain axis that I mentioned earlier. It's literally the major communication line between the gut and the brain. And then looking at things like, do I have fatigue, brain fog, very much linked to poor vagal tone? Do I have different inflammatory problems, autoimmune problems? Very much linked to poor vagal tone. Things like fibromyalgia, linked to poor vagal tone. Digestive problems, linked to poor vagal tone. So I think just taking a checklist and saying, well, if I have these check engine lights are on, well, a component, at the very least, a component to why I feel the way that I do has to do in part with this poor vagal tone, this largest cranial nerve that's regulating my resting, digesting aspect of my autonomic nervous system is weak, and I need to tone it. Just like we'd go to the gym and flex that muscle to become stronger, we need to go into nervous system training to get that proper modulation of the parasympathetic nervous system and the vagus nerve. Now, beyond that, labs can substantiate it. There are some people that have no data on their health at all, and they know they don't feel good. They feel dysregulated. They feel wired and tired, anxious and exhausted. Maybe they know they're struggling with some of these problems, but they don't have any data points. All those things I just mentioned, whether it's an autoimmune problem or metabolic issue or an inflammatory problem or a gut health problem or hormonal problem, we can quantify these on labs. And at that point, you can know, okay, look, yes, these are data points that are not normal, but understandable, and we can get these optimized. Part of getting those numbers optimized is improving vagal tone.
It's interesting because for a long time, I didn't really identify with certain things like anxiety. I'm realizing mine just shows up in a different way than other people's. So I don't have that like outward expression of an anxiety attack or even seeming like it at all. I'll just avoid it. But I've been doing this work for a while. So over time, I've become less reactive and very mindful. And so it's just interesting how you talked about meeting people where they are and doing what they can do. So I found myself at one point as like this, okay, I don't feel stressed out by things. And it took until having kids that I realized that, oh, I have this very mild feeling of guilt with that hustle culture that you talked about. So when I'm laying there bored, instead of recognizing that boredom is actually really good for the brain, I feel guilty, and it's so buried that I'm like, okay, it's so deep in there. I feel like it's got to be affecting me in some way or another. And just because, I'm not outwardly expressing anxiety or depression or stress doesn't mean that it's still not wreaking havoc on my body in other ways. I'm just not wreaking havoc on other people with it.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's introspection and awareness and body awareness, right? Of knowing this energy field, if you will, this emotion, this feeling in my body, somatically doesn't feel right. And I think that's growing in awareness. And like you said, it even took being a mom. Like there's different seasons of people's lives where it maybe has always been there, but it's like more obvious or rearing its head or flaring up, that we can start to handle these things. And the things that, it's different. I hear people all the time that like, I knew I should have handled this back then, and I wish I did. I just wasn't ready, or I didn't see it. And that's okay. I think just realizing that all of these things are part of our own process of things coming to surface and handling it when we have the opportunity or bandwidth to do so. And healing is nonlinear too. Like we never have it all figured out, where I see like all these super like type A biohacker, like meditate all the time, like all the stuff, they still have crap to deal with. Like it's just giving yourself, and that's part of that FOMO culture that I talk about in the book, where you feel like you're not good enough, you don't have it all figured out, you're not doing enough of the next somatic breathwork, meditation, wellnessy stuff. That's why the subtitle of my book is called Healing the Shame-Fueled Relationship Between What You Eat and How You Feel. Because this is not a you issue. Like this is like a me issue and like an everyone issue. And giving yourself that grace and self-compassion, and a science around self-compassion, is one of the best ways actually to lower inflammation and like the antidote to shame-inflammation. But easier said than done, I know that. But it is retraining our nervous system, retraining our body to operate from more of that space of self-compassion.
Yeah, I realized that before I had kids, I'd feel the same sort of melancholy would probably be the best word for it, when I was in those periods of like boredom, not knowing what to do. But the way I interpreted it back then was I was almost like disappointed in what the world wasn't giving me. And something shifted since having kids, that now I'm like disappointed in what I'm not giving the world. And on one hand, I do think that's healthier in some way. It's just changing my perspective on that even more. It's like, yes, I do want to give. And I do realize that that light inside, the feelings that I'm feeling are based on my interaction with the world, not what I'm expecting to get. However, can I still approach that feeling without the shame, without the guilt, without the negative feelings around it, and instead use it as a source of inspiration on, how I want to shine, if that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a distinction in my mind to guilt and shame, right? It's like if somebody is maybe distracted or had a rough day or whenever reasoning, right? And they're kind of not present with their kids, or they're kind of snapping at their friends and loved ones, their partner. I think there's a certain level of, like you're saying, like guilt can motivate you to be a better version of yourself, and saying, no, I don't want that. And like that, even that concept of repentance, which can have a lot of religious backgrounds, but its origin, actually, the Hebrew word is teshuvah. It means to turn around. So even in a religious secular thing, like, can we turn around our behaviors to want to be a better version of ourselves? Because the difference between guilt and shame, guilt says, okay, this thing was out of alignment with who I want to be and how I want to act. And it's not who I am, but it's what I did. And it's not an indictment on my character and my very soul, but it's something that I want to change and turn around how I would do it, because I want to treat other people the way that I want to be treated, or whatever our reasoning is. Shame says it's who you are versus just what you do. Guilt says this is what I did. Shame says this is who I am at my very soul. There's something ineffably unlikable and lovable and broken with me. And I think that's the difference here. It's just when you're talking about wellness or our bodies, our relationship with food, or relationship with our body or other people or job or career, whatever, the distinction between the two. Like one could just be a sign of like, ooh, this is out of alignment, I want to do better, versus the other one is like, this is who I am.
So say someone's listening and they're like, yeah, I'm not ready to tackle the emotional side yet. What are the basics of food that I need to turn that around? Where should they start?
From a food side of things?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, when we're talking about inflammation and the gut-brain axis, we have to look at, we are that cliche, you are what you eat. Well, if you want to get a little bit more nuanced with that, we are what our microbiome eats. It's all the terms for the trillions of bacteria in our gut. Depending on the study that you look at, we have upwards of 100 trillion bacteria in our gut and about 30 trillion human cells. So we are exponentially more bacteria than human. This sort of sophisticated host for this microbiome metropolis that influences our mood. 95% of serotonin is made in the gut, 50% of dopamine. So our happy and pleasure neurotransmitter is predominantly made in the gut, stored in the gut, and they do not pass through the understanding as far as the mechanism is concerned. They don't pass through the blood-brain barrier. They actually work upon GI motility and innervation to work upon the vagus nerve. So two-thirds, the exponential, almost all of serotonin that's made in the body predominantly is made in the gut, stored in the gut, and working on the vagus nerve that we talked about earlier. Well, we are what our microbiome eats. The bacteria that influence the metabolites, these production molecules that the bacteria make, work upon serotonin production in the vagus nerve and inflammation levels, of which this is all connected. It's part of that neuroimmunoendocrine axis that I mentioned earlier. So that's sort of what's at play here. But it's also, the gut is home to 75% of the immune system. Inflammation is a product of the immune system. So that's sort of the immuno aspect of the neuroimmunoendocrine axis. So the gut brain and the brain hormonal axis is constantly communicating. And there's sort of upstream and downstream bidirectional communication lines between this. The food we eat influences the expression of the microbiome and influences the expression of inflammation levels in the body, of which is the commonality between every health problem under the sun. So this is what's at stake here. And this is why every food we eat either feeds inflammation or fights it. There's no Switzerland meal that's doing nothing for my body. There's some negligible ways that you won't notice, but it's providing your body raw materials and feedback and fuel to do different things, to make hormones, to make the immune system function, to make the very cells of our body. So if I would look at the foods that are most likely to be assaulting to the human body, and this is not about a moral judgment, this is not about an indictment, this is not about shaming anybody, this is about a conversation on healthy boundaries and also bioindividuality. So that's the caveat with this topic, because I know there's a lot of shame around food, and avoiding foods that don't love you back is not restrictive, it's self-respect. And I want people to just have the curiosity to find out what foods their body loves, so they can have healthy boundaries with the foods that don't love them back. So that's the caveat there. What I would say is the most common foods that don't love most humans back to varying degrees would be what I would call the inflammatory core 4. And if I can add a +1, it would be, but there's not a pithy rhyming name for it. But number one would be gluten-containing grains, which, look, let's talk about the nuance of this. There are better for you versions of that, like ancient grain, sourdough bread, which ferments the gluten protein there. But for the sake of simplicity, looking at gluten-containing grains, because we've hybridized it, we've sprayed it with things that it's out of alignment with what humans would have consumed for a long time, and they're over-consuming it. So soaking it, sprouting it, fermenting it, ancient versions of it can make it less immunoreactive, but most people aren't consuming it in those forms. So looking at that. Number 2 would be industrial seed oils like vegetable oil, canola oil, soybean oil, vegetable oil, soybean oil, I think canola oil, if I didn't mention all those. So my opinion on this, and this is maybe a little bit controversial within the wellness space, but I would say I don't think it's the oils in and of themselves. I think it's the overconsumption of them. And I think it's the modern American or Western diet is so out of balance when it comes to these polyunsaturated fatty acids. If you're looking at the ratios of omegas 3, 6, and 9, those are all PUFAs or polyunsaturated fatty acids. If someone was eating lots of good whole food based omega-3s like fish, etc., chia seeds, flaxseed, that type of stuff, and had some vegetable oil and some packaged foods, it wouldn't matter so much. But the problem is it's flipped the other way around for the average Westerner. So I'm not making blanket statements about those oils. They're just in a lot of processed packaged foods, and we're eating too much of those and not enough of whole food based fatty acid sources like fish and other sources of omega-3s. But looking at those in packaged foods, number 3 would be added sugar, which most people know that. But even the nicer sounding, marketed very well euphemisms for sugar, but are still sugar. So I would look at the grams of added sugar to any foods that we have. When it's in the absence of fiber, which blunts a lot of the glucose or blood sugar spikes, that's feeding a lot of dysregulation in that body. It's going to impact blood sugar, which is really like gasoline on a fire when it comes to people that have different inflammatory problems or mental health issues like anxiety and depression and fatigue. And then the last would be dairy, which there are better for you versions of dairy, right? You can get grass-fed or whole milk or like full fat, like grass-fed A2 milk even. If you see A2 milk in grocery stores, what they're talking about is this casein subtype, which most cows humans would have consumed, or most milk that humans would have consumed for thousands of years, is this beta A2 casein. Most Westerners are eating milk and dairy that has predominantly beta A1 casein, which researchers are postulating is a component as to why people have these dairy allergies and sensitivities and reactivities. So getting more of these fermented dairies, even that breaks down the casein, similar to the bread that I mentioned earlier, the kefirs, the cheeses, the yogurts can break down the casein, making it more digestible. So but for the sake of simplicity, looking at dairy. Now, all of these have one thing in common, is what researchers refer to as an epigenetic genetic mismatch, that our genetics haven't changed in 10,000 years. Our microbiome, of which is like most of us, like as bacteria, not human, that hasn't changed in millions and millions of years. But we're eating foods that are out of alignment. It's an evolutionary mismatch, which is triggering genetic predispositions that have been lying dormant for 10,000 plus years, but are being awoken like never before because of this evolution or this epigenetic genetic mismatch. So that's what I would call the inflammatory core 4. And then the +1 is alcohol, which I never make any friends when I talk about alcohol, but it is a decimator to the microbiome. It's a neurotoxin. It can shrink your brain. It's not good. But, even with that, I'm a pragmatist because most people aren't going to be teetotaling Puritans. So I have to find like better for you options even there too.
I have had this giant kind of health awakening in the last couple of years. I will say previously to that, I thought I was a very healthy person. I was vegan for 5 years, ate like whole food vegan, not eating all the processed stuff. And it was this pregnancy that I actually just was really feeling called to reintroduce animal products. And so now I eat almost completely different than I did before. I've been really watching seed oils in the last year. In August, it'll be 2 years now since I gave up alcohol. And I will say, of all of the things that I've changed, giving up alcohol was such a game changer. I look different. Like my face looks different. It is so easy to be effortlessly thin. I know that's not the case for everybody, but I dealt with bulimia years ago. And so my weight was always going up and down because of that stress I was putting on my body. But then even when I healed that, it stabilized a little bit, but it still was like work. It was still always a thought like, okay, I'm waking up inflamed really, or like just feeling pudgy, whatever it was. That just stopped when I gave up alcohol.
Mhm.
My mood swings changed, fatigue changed. It was a huge game changer. And so it started as like the more sober curious, like I just wanted to cut back. But once I felt those changes, I mean, I'm not even tempted anymore. Even the moments that I'm at like a Christmas party where I'm like, oh, a glass of mulled wine would sound good. I'm like, even if I was like, today is the day, I don't want to wake up feeling less good than I normally wake up feeling. And so I will not make friends with you and add a thumbs up for that lifestyle.
Oh my gosh. Right. And that's the paradigm shift. It's like you hit on something that's so magical and freeing. I call it in the book, we talk about it with patients, it's called food peace or drink peace. It's not about like a restrictive, oh my gosh, this is so boring. This is miserable. I'm just so like without. No, it's like you love feeling great more than you thought you wanted something that's going to dim your life. It's not a punishment. It's like, no, but it's a bad trade-off. And I think that's the paradigm shift that I think people need to realize is that when they feel so freaking good, it's like if someone has such a bright light and something's going to dim that light, you're way less likely to want it. And you actually prefer not doing that. So that's what people aren't realizing is that the problem is their light is dim. And I'm not making a moral judgment. I'm just saying that their body's not thriving. And then they get that cheap dopamine hit or numbing because they are dysregulated already. Then it's like, yeah, well, that escapism, that numbing is appealing. And it seems like, oh my gosh, that's when I feel the least anxious. It's that social lubricant. I can just forget my problems for a little bit. So under that paradigm, yeah, I get it. But there is another path where you can actually feel amazing, completely sober. And that's going to look like such a cheap masquerade. It's a mask for actual feeling great, because you will sustainably feel great without feeling like crap the next morning. And it'll be authentic and centered and focused, and you'll be able to remember everything. And it's like so many reasons why what we're talking about here is really a form of self-respect, not out of restriction.
And where restriction actually leads to freedom. I'm actually reminded of my bulimia days, as I call them. There was so much thought around when I was trying to do good that day. And I'd be like, well, okay, I know that this is a trigger food, so I won't eat much of it. But it was like constantly this thought. And I remember thinking there were so many days that I thought, I can't imagine a world where I'm not bulimic, because how will I regulate my weight? Which is so backwards now because, like I said, once I healed from that, my weight regulated, didn't realize what I was doing. But in that same way, the alcohol, I remember first giving it up and I'm just like, can I even imagine doing this forever? Like, what about those days I'm snowboarding and at the top of the mountain and want a glass of wine? Like, I want to save it for that, which is why I kind of went the sober curious movement. But it's funny because the longer it goes, I don't feel the pull for that. So I'm not saying no to myself all the time like I thought I was going to. I'm actually just saying yes to other feelings. And so realizing that, like, yeah, it might seem impossible, whether it's the sugar or the processed foods or the alcohol, whatever it is we're talking about, where you really feel that pull and it's like, I can't do this resistance game forever. It's like, no, you just have to get past that point of your brain or your body being addicted to that one thing. And then you just feel freedom and you don't have to fight with it anymore.
Right. It's totally true. And because just echoing that point, it's not about deprivation. And I think this is where people go off and they're not setting them up. So they're not setting themselves up for success sustainably. It's really about nourishing things that love you back. It's not about leaving a deficit where it's like, okay, I'm not doing something, especially around food, where people really crash when they are in that sort of dieting mentality. It's like, instead of nourishing their body with nutrient dense, like nourishing calorically rich foods that love them back, they're just eating less of everything and then going off of like sugar and the things that they think that they know doesn't serve them. But they're in this hypocaloric state, which isn't going to be healthy for anybody and will leave you on that roller coaster. And same with alcohol. You end up you have the same social groups, the same activities, and you maybe need to explore like what's a delicious mocktail that you love, or these amazing neurotropic, adaptogenic things that are out there, or other things that would bring a sense of community and deliciousness and fun, but aren't like you're not paying for it the next day.
Yeah, when I was giving up alcohol, I spent more money that next month or two on mocktails than anything. But I allowed myself because I'm like,
Yeah.
I know that so much of it is the behavioral addiction too, like pouring the glass of wine, sipping
Yeah,
something nice
the
when
ritual.
making dinner. So and then I replaced it, and it was an expensive shift
Yeah.
at first, oddly. But then after a while, because those substances weren't actually addictive, it became less and less, and now I don't want non-alcoholic wine at the party any more than I want wine at
Right.
the party, you know? Like
Yeah.
give me a glass of water. Like,
Exactly.
I'll bring
Or like
tea.
get it like a seltzer water and like put some like lemon or lime in it. Or I see some people put like a little bit of, this is a little weird, but put a little of apple cider vinegar in a seltzer water and do it that way. Like there's so many different easy, low cost ways. But yeah, the industry of mocktails is kind of fun to explore, and maybe you'll find one that you love, but I actually prefer just keeping it simple. Just give me a seltzer water.
So going back to the emotional side, another aspect that you mention in your book is around intergenerational trauma. And we talked about childhood a little bit, but what do we know about even the stress maybe our parents carried, or the way that what gets passed down to us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this is a section in gut feelings that I really wanted to explore because the science is just fascinating to me. And the caveat with this is it's heavy stuff, and B, we don't have to have it all figured out again. And C, I would say some people will say, wow, I'm screwed. Like if it wasn't enough, like just with my own trauma, now I have to worry about my great grandparents' trauma. And the whole point is where we're at right now in our life is you don't have to necessarily know, is this my trauma or is this some ancestral thing? The point is, what do we have to do today to start to heal from this? And I would say too, if anything, I think shifting your perspective and paradigm to, wow, a little bit more self-compassion, and say, well, what I'm going through today isn't just me, and I'm not just broken, or I'm not just like messed up. I can heal from these things. And as trauma can be inherited, so can healing. And I see people break the cycles of dysfunction, disease, and disorder and dysregulation all the time and heal themselves, but also heal their families, heal their friend circles, heal, I think of this like this generation, like the new line that they've broken the old one and are actually planting a seed for a new generation. Like if they choose to have kids, like they're healing their kids and their children's children and generations they'll never get to meet because of what they did in this life. What power is that we wield? What agency, what influence that we wield with our life and this go at life. But anyways, the research around this is in the scientific literature looking at normally geopolitical situations that are they're extreme, right? So they're easier to research as big groups of people to study connections with these methylation changes. Methylation is an aspect that we actually quantify clinically for patients too, of different gene SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms, that researchers are looking at other aspects of methylation and how these things code for neurotransmitters or inflammation levels or way the hormones are functioning. And methylation is needed for the production of many different aspects of our immune system, our mental health, and our like very hormonal health, and basically the neuroimmunoendocrine axis. Methylation is like the biochemical processes of these systems of the body. So the researchers that mainly have been studying things like the Holocaust in Germany and Poland, there's something called the Holodomor in the Ukraine in the early 20th century. Joseph Stalin basically made a man-made famine, and it was a Holocaust of the Ukrainian people in the early 20th century. And also the Rwandan genocide, the Hutu and the Tutsis tribes in Rwanda in the 90s. And they saw similar methylation changes that people went through those horrible atrocities. And those same methylation epigenetic changes were passed down to their kids and their grandkids and beyond. And they had increased likelihood of different specific health issues like metabolic issues, autoimmune problems, mental health issues, like a scarcity, like panic disorders, things like that. So that is what we're just scratching the surface of what intergenerational or transgenerational trauma looks like. But then I see this play out when you get to know somebody, clinically monitoring them and coaching them and seeing the things that they're working on when they're dealing with their own health, of how it's connected to their past, whether they know it or not. But through breath work and somatic practices and different mind-body practices, we really can metabolize these stored traumas that are possible from our own life, obviously, but even beyond that. And the science is just beginning to show what's at play here. We are literally, in many ways, living out the life of our ancestors, and this is our chance to undo that and fix these things.
When I had my first child, suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, there's so much more work to do of things I don't want to pass down. That's actually what inspired me to stop drinking alcohol, because I had cut back a lot over the years. I was a huge party girl in my 20s, but I'm like, oh, I just have a glass of wine at night, maybe 2, maybe 3, denied how often I would do that third glass. But then I was just like, I don't want my son to just always see a glass of wine in my hand and just think that's normal. And then he becomes the guy that just always has a beer after work. Like, if he can do what he wants, but I want to give him a clean slate to start from. And I remember when I was learning first on the original path, the beginning of my path of self-growth, I had a lot of feelings about where I came from. And there was some big traumas in my family line. My grandpa murdered my grandma before I was born, but my dad's side dealt with so much stress and that manifested in so many different ways with those 7 kids. And I remember specifically having resentment after my dad died, where I'm like, gosh, like the only thing he did to help heal this was the religion he chose, which I didn't feel in alignment with. And I was basically making myself a victim of my circumstances. And it was through a plant medicine journey, actually, where I had this revelation that I chose this for a reason. I chose this family. And so I don't know what everyone else's beliefs are, but that was a big perspective shift for me, where I'm just like, well, why is this my mission to overcome in this life? And maybe something about me overcoming this specific thing is what will help me blossom into my fullest, most authentic self. And then I was able to even look at the work my dad did, and I'm like, just because his path didn't align with mine, he still set me up. I mean, he was the first person to get sober, and he was the first person to find some sort of higher power. It might not be the one that works for me, or the perspective of it that works for me, I should say. I think they're kind of all leading towards the same places. But yeah, and so then there's still just, I'm unraveling that in my own way and passing that down. And so just looking at it in that way made me feel more empowered than a victim of what I came from.
Yeah, I love that. And it's these different vantage points and this inner work that allows us to see the bigger picture, right? And for some people, it could be simple as I talk about the science of breath work and somatic practices that really can give that vantage point and disconnect you and allow you to realize you aren't your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you are the observing presence of them. And for some people, it could be something like breath work or meditation or grounding practices, somatic work, EMDR. Some people, it can be plant medicine. For some people, it can be traditional like psychiatry. For some people, it can be Orthodox religion, So it is all of these paths to start to, hopefully the goal would be to create this presence and this mindful awareness of who we are. So we are acting less from a victim mindset and overwhelm and seeing ourselves as the small little me that's everything's done to me, instead of seeing this bigger, like what's happening for me and what can I am empowered to handle the things that I have in this life.
Another thing I see trending lately, and it might just be who I follow online, but I feel like more people are becoming aware of their hormones and how it is sort of insight into the health of our system. Can you tell us about how our hormones speak to us or what they're affected by?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So it's to bring it back to that neuroimmunoendocrine axis is the endocrine part of the neuroimmuno. So it's kind of nice. Yeah, you probably planned this already, but the fact that we're walking through the nervous system, the immune system, and the endocrine system, well, that aspect of it, I think in the most elementary level, hormones are kind of like little physiological emails, little biochemical emails that are being sent. So they're the last part of the neuroimmunoendocrine axis. So oftentimes they're a response, they're an email to a larger context to what's going on with the regular, like the rest of the body. They are messengers. So the context around hormonal imbalances, quote unquote, matters because typically it's a response to some greater context to it. And I think that's a bigger point. Now, the emails will impact how we feel, certainly, but the hormonal imbalances don't oftentimes happen in a vacuum. There's like a larger context as to what's going on. They are going to compound and exacerbate and increase symptoms without a doubt when they are out of balance. But I think the bigger health history, context, labs matters when you're talking about hormones because a lot of things can influence them. So it's about balance, just like anything else in the body. Inflammation is not inherently bad. It's a product of the immune system, as I mentioned. You don't want excess inflammation. You don't want a deficiency. Same with our gut microbiome. You don't want bacterial overgrowths. You don't want deficiencies of bacteria or immunodeficiencies. It's not good. Same with hormones. You don't want dominances or excess hormone production. You don't want deficiencies. So it's subject to the Goldilocks principle, just like the immune system, just like the nervous system, just like inflammation levels and the gut bacteria. So these are things that we can quantify in labs and track over time. We have a high population for telehealth patients of our top professions are entrepreneurs, engineers, school teachers, and nurses. And I think there's a commonality between those four spaces, and it's a love of spreadsheets. And we can get to the root cause of tracking data. I'm saying, okay, what are my hormones? What's my inflammation? What's my whatever we're biomarker we're tracking, and getting those data numbers looking great, and getting to the root cause. So some of the hormones that we look at will be a full thyroid panel, like a full TSH, T4, T3, free T3, free T4, thyroid antibody, something called reverse T3, which is kind of the thyroid's brake system. So we're looking at the gasoline brake ratios and lots of different nuance to those biochemical emails. That's just the thyroid hormone, which is very important. Every cell of our body has a thyroid receptor site. But then looking at cortisol rhythm throughout the day, looking at estrogen and all its metabolites. There's something called estrone, estradiol, and estriol. Looking at progesterone and all its metabolites, looking at testosterone, all of its metabolites. And I think I mentioned all of the main ones. And leptin and insulin, of course, we have to mention those too. So we look at all of those major hormonal patterns, and it's when they're off, they're going to impact things like our mood, our sex drive, our weight, our energy levels, our digestion, our skin, our hair, our nails, lots of different things, our sleep. So we have to get those optimal. So I am happy. I like that you said that, like more people are becoming aware. But I think it's born out of the fact that people are wanting answers, right? There's an epidemic of different health issues out there. Even the most conservative statistics will tell you that. And people are wanting to have agency over their health. And the old age of this sort of white coat gatekeeper, because I said so, isn't going to cut it for people. Because there's a lot of what I call, and I talk about it in the book, medical gaslighting around these topics of autoimmunity and mental health issues and hormonal problems. When they know intuitively something's off here and they're told, yeah, you're just depressed, take these antidepressant, or you're just getting older, or you're just a new mom, or you're just stressed, or whatever the well-intentioned maybe reason is, the person knows their body. And I would say that's why you're seeing this conversations on hormones, because people are wanting data. They're wanting to look at labs, and they're wanting to look at optimal, not average. And I think that's a bigger point here too, is that this reference range on a lab is largely based on a statistical bell curve average of people who go to labs. People that go to labs are going through hormonal problems and metabolic problems and inflammatory problems too. And comparing yourself to people with health problems is no way for you to find out how you can feel your best. So in functional medicine, that's where we even get our name. We're looking at the functional range. Like, where does your body function the best? Like, where does optimal, vibrant wellness reside? What's from a longevity and health span and lifespan wise? Where do those people live? So we can get you there if you're not there. So I think it's important. When I'm glad that people are starting to ask questions and wanting answers to have agency over their health.
Well, we've gone over some of the basics with food. What I like to leave listeners with something to focus on so that they, feel a little bit more empowered with something that they can do. And we talked about the food side of that, where to start with that. What is something that they can focus on the emotional side to help them live free from shameflammation?
Well, I think I'm touched upon it, but I think breathwork is one of the most powerful, completely free, accessible, and so multidimensional and bio-individual. There's so many ways to use breath as medicine. I talk about some beginner, moderate to advanced ways that science is really showing breathwork as a medicine to metabolize stored trauma, to regulate that neuroimmunoendocrine axis, to calm inflammation, regulate your nervous system, strengthen that vagus nerve, and balance hormones, and a cascade of regulation in the body. So box breathing is one for people to try. It's typically done through breathing through your nose, and you breathe for about 4 seconds through inhaling through your nose, holding for that same amount of time, and then exhaling for that same amount, 4 seconds, and then holding for 4 seconds, and then repeating. So creating this sort of metaphorical box through your breath, inhale, exhale with holds in between the two. So that's an easy one. You could be in the car, you could be in traffic, right? You could be at your desk, you could be sitting on the couch, you could be outside and doing this. And then there's more advanced ones, like you mentioned, plant medicine and psychedelics. I talk about the research in the book, but also something called holotropic breath work, which is born out of the research with psychedelics. And we can elicit these centers in our brain, our nervous system, and our immune system, and the endocrine system through breath. And instead of it through the nose, it's typically holotropic is done through the mouth, which is more of a visceral somatic experience in that way. People feel it all in their bodies and can very much have the same or very similar experiences as people that do plant medicines and psychedelics to metabolize stored trauma. Typically, you could assume that you're doing this in a class setting, a holotropic class setting, that I've seen be very helpful. And there's other less maybe advanced ways people can do somatic practices that are very you can do it on your own. I teach different practices in the book to start to regulate this. A lot of this is strengthening that vagus nerve that we started the conversation about. So those are some ideas for people to explore, do some reading about, and educate yourself on.
I actually have a box breathwork audio in my membership portal for anyone interested with that. And holotropic breathwork, I did a workshop in Los Angeles once or twice, and it was really powerful. I loved that experience, and I really felt different. I felt an obvious difference in myself for days afterwards. And so I would love to, thanks for the reminder, to make that more of a practice in my life, or to find another workshop, because it was really great. And so for listeners that are interested in learning more about living shameflammation free, where's the best place that they can connect with you and find your book?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Everything's at drwillcole.com. It's drwillcole.com. The links to the telehealth center there. We have new telehealth patient options there, as well as the book for gut feelings, my past books. My podcast is called The Art of Being Well. We talk a lot about these topics there too, but everything's living on the site for them to check out.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/311. Your challenge for this week is to try your hand at breathwork. Breathwork is an extremely powerful practice, especially if you do it regularly. Even through just one session, people have been able to reach altered states of consciousness. Beyond that, breathwork can reduce stress, it's an emotional release, it can give you increased energy and mental clarity, it improves your respiratory health, it enhances self-awareness, it regulates your nervous system, it increases your resilience. I mean, what more could you be looking for in a 5 to 10 minute practice? So it's definitely worth getting into, but I know that sometimes the barrier to entry can just feel difficult. If you've never done it before, there's millions of videos online about it. Where do you start? So if you are a Mind Love member, I actually have several breathwork practices within the Mind Love membership. So if you want to sign up, you can sign up at mindlove.com/membership. If you're already a member, you can go to mindlove.com/my-account. And there's breathwork under the meditation audios. If you are not a Mind Love member, check out my Instagram at mindlovemelissa. I'm going to post one of my favorite breathwork exercises. So that's Instagram at mindlovemelissa. If you love this episode, please consider sharing it. Take a screenshot, tag Mind Love Melissa and Mind Love Podcast, or you can also just tap the share button and share it directly with someone who needs it. The membership is at mindlove.com/membership. There's amazing masterclasses released every single month. So if you're looking for a guided way to bring more intention to your life this year, the membership is where it's at. And you can find all of my sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with Mind Love. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.